I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terri.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 145. And today it is Terri's turn to share something with us. What have you got for us today, Terri?
Well, Daisy, I went back to one of our favorites, Kwik Brain with Jim Kwik. And it's episode 314, World's Longest Study on Happiness.
Ooh.
And the guest on this episode is Robert Waldinger, who is a psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, and also a Zen priest. He has been involved in a research project and co-author of a book called The Good Life. He's been involved in a research project that has been happening for over 85 years. Obviously, he was not in the beginning, but it's an 85-year study on happiness. So really kind of an interesting thing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So the episode began basically with Jim Kwik asking him, what predicts happiness? What are we learning? And he said, is it fame? Is it money? Because that's often what people kind of assume will lead to happiness. And Professor Waldinger said, no, actually, that does not predict happiness. Instead, it is the quality of relationships that predicts happiness. And not only happiness, but also predicted health and longevity. Mm-hmm. And I know you and I have had a bit of a theme over the last month and a half or so related to the idea of connection and the power of connection and relationships. So I thought this would fit right in with what we've been talking about.
It's not the Harvard studies. It was the study I referred to a while back. I'm sure that was over like 80-something years.
It may have been.
I think that was a Harvard study. I can't remember. Anyway.
I'm guessing there can't have been too many 85-year studies on this.
They check in with the same people, the same group of people every decade or every however many years.
And interestingly, of the original 724 participants, 40 of them are still living, and they're in their late 90s and early 100s. So we'll talk about some findings from that. But so Jim Kwik asked, well, when you talk about relationships, what do you mean? Like romantic relationships? What type of relationships? And again, Dr. Waldinger said, no, actually any relationships. And it doesn't mean that you have to be living with someone. It doesn't mean you have to be in a romantic relationship. And the idea that we get connection in lots of different relationships, like if you frequent a coffee shop, the barista may be one of these relationships that actually helps toward predicting your happiness and your health and longevity. So try to encourage people, I think, to really think a little more broadly about relationships, not just, how many deep friendships do I have, or am I in a romantic relationship versus connecting with people. He identified that social isolation and loneliness, and I know we talked a little bit about some research on loneliness, but it predicts worse health and more cognitive decline and dementia, and even earlier dementia or cognitive decline. So isolation and loneliness. And I think, unfortunately, we're probably going to be seeing a lot more of these as knock-on effects from the whole COVID experience, how much isolation there was and loneliness, how much that increased over the few years that we've been going through. So one of the things that I found very interesting about the results from this study is that the participants who were most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. Now, as you and I both know about research, correlation cannot be interpreted as cause, but that's an interesting correlation.
Yeah, and it's also, we're sort of, 50 is in the rear view, but not that far. So that's got me thinking, okay.
Yeah, we're still in the zone, Daisy. We're still there. And they made some kind of predictions about why this might be. Why might relationships be such a predictor of happiness, predictors of better health and increased longevity? And one of the summaries that they came to is that they believe at least a large component to it is about its ability to relieve stress. Relationships help us relieve our stress.
Makes sense.
And so they talked about the fight or flight mechanism in our brain. You and I have touched on that many, many times. But ideally, what happens, we go into fight or flight when there's a threat, and we're meant to return to equilibrium. And I always picture these, I don't know, television shows when you're watching animals in the wild, like a zebra is drinking from the water and a predator comes by and you see the zebra panic, run, and then a minute later, they're drinking again, just calm. That's really how it's supposed to work. But that doesn't always work that well for people. And some of us have even more difficulty returning to that state of equilibrium. And so what they believe is that if we don't have any relationships where we can process that or connect with someone, that we tend to stay in a more chronic state of fight or flight. And this means increased levels of the stress hormone, cortisol, and that we miss out on the opportunity to lower levels of inflammation. And so we've got increased levels of cortisol, which has all kinds of negative effects on us, health-wise and quality of life-wise. And then also higher levels of inflammation, which you and I have, we talk about a lot, maybe not as often in here, but just the role of inflammation in diseases and complications in life. So this was kind of the most detail they went into about the actual study, but the conversation then moved a little more to, well, how to connect? How do we, let's say you move to a new place, like you've done recently, I've done recently. How do you connect? And one of the things they highlighted, which reminds me of my early 20s, when I was a beginning teacher, and I think all of the other teachers wanted to help me find someone to spend my life with. And they would always recommend, go to church. Oh, go do this. And I remember I had a client whose mom really told her, if you want to meet a guy, you're going to have to go to the gym. And she said, Mom, I don't like working out. Why would I want to find someone at the gym? So Jim Kwik and Robert Waldinger talked about the idea that helpful to do things that put you into contact with people who share some interests. Now, that might be volunteering for a particular type of organization. Like you and I might volunteer at an animal organization or an organization focused on gender issues or something that we talk about as important to us. But the fact that you're going to be engaging with people doing this activity or engaging with this organization means that it's going to give you more encouragement to communicate with the people who are there and also have some potential for repeated exposure, which means relationship opportunity. If I do a one-time thing, many of us say, well, why bother talking to anybody? I'm never going to see these people again. Or if I get involved in activities that tends to attract people that are very different from me and we don't share any interests, again, why would I bother talking to them very much? So getting involved in things that you are likely to come into contact with people who share some interests, some values that you do, and then also maybe give you some opportunities for repeated exposure. Maybe it's a monthly thing that you do, or someone might be in a park run group, meaning they're going to run into these, literally, they're going to run with these people on a regular basis. So more likelihood that they'll develop connections.
Yes, and presumably when you talk there about doing something that's tapping into your values, that's really tapping into something, things that are really important to you, things that make up your identity. And so if you're doing something that taps into some of your core values, the chances are much more likely that you're going to be interacting with people that you get on with, because the chances are good that that's also going to be a core value for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, who then would I want to develop more connection with? people who share some interests and values.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. They then branched this conversation a little bit into this mindset that many of us get into, and I do this at times, thinking it's kind of too late for me. I'm already this age, or I've lived here this long. It's kind of too late. I've missed my opportunity. And really what they found is that a lot of people who say it's too late for me, these people are in their 20s and they've already got this mindset that it's over. So thinking that it's too late for you is a problematic way to approach this. It's never too late for relationships and connections. He then talked about the fact that they had, really touched base with people closer to the end of their lives. And they asked them, what are your biggest regrets? And what are your proudest moments or things that you're most proud of? And their biggest regrets tended to be not spending enough time with people who were important to them. So people might have said, well, I worked too often, I missed time with my kids, or I didn't go out with my friends because I was studying or whatever. And the things that they reported feeling the most proud of were their relationships. I was a good mentor. I was a really good boss. I think I was a really good parent for my kids, or I was a good partner, or I've always been a really good friend, whatever. That those are often the proudest things they spoke about, which I think is really powerful.
Mm.
They then moved into talking a little bit about more recent things about, for example, social media and things. And I can't actually remember I think Jim Kwik mentioned something he referred to as digital depression, but the idea of some of the negative.
He likes his alliteration, doesn't he? So probably.
He does. Which is probably the only reason I remembered what it was, actually. But they talked about the idea that we basically curate our lives on social media. We choose what to share. And one of the drawbacks for many of us is that this leads us to comparing our inside experience to others' outside. So what they choose to share, all their vacations on a beautiful beach and the new car they got and all these great things, and they don't share the other things. And Professor Waldinger said, I don't post on social media every morning that I wake up not feeling well or with a more depressed mood. But then I show you when I won an award, or I show you the great trick my dog can do. And it really just kind of helps create a disparity in what we think everyone's lives are versus how our lives are. And in reality, everyone's lives are a whole mixture of some messy things, some great things, some joy, some sadness, some boredom, some frustration. And I think it's really important when we talk about this idea of happiness that we have to understand that we're not actually meant to be happy 100% of the time.
No. Be impossible, really, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. But many of us feel that something's wrong with us if we're not happy all the time. Either we've just got kind of a bum deal on the card game of life, or that something's wrong with us that we can't experience more happiness in it.
Well, if you think about it, if you were happy all the time, you couldn't really classify it as happiness, almost. You have to have a comparison. You have to have the opposite or some kind of comparison to classify one thing as something and not something else.
That's right. But I think many of us struggle with this, maybe especially when we're younger. I can think even now, many adolescents that I talk to, the belief is I should be happy all the time, but I'm bored right now. It's like, that's okay. You need to be bored right now so that you recognize happiness even more. And then he talked about this idea of kind of that they talk about in the book, this bedrock of wellness, that social connection is the bedrock of wellness, and looking at your physical health as well as what they refer to as your social fitness, meaning that relationships have to be taken care of. You have to put time into them. They actually require work. And Jim Kwik even highlighted this. He said, I think in my early years, I just assumed my relationships are fine. My friends will be there. And you start to recognize that if you don't invest in them, they don't happen. And I was thinking about that even for you and me. We have this podcast, so we always have some reason to connect. but we haven't gotten to connect lately. And so I was thinking before we came on today, like Daisy and I need to set up a time just to talk, not record, because that's about investing in the relationship. We need time to process things. We need time to connect, not just do our work together. So,
and it is something you don't appreciate when you're younger, because a lot of the friendships that you make tend to be at school or at college or whatever. It's something that you're doing every day. So you see people every day, and you're spending a lot of time with people. You're spending a lot of time with people doing the thing that you're there to do, be at school, for example. But then, of course, you're automatically in the setting, in the context for then when you have that sociable time, when it's lunch break or whatever, and you go to just be sociable, but you're there, it is automatic, and you do take it for granted, and you don't realize that you need to put work in when you're away from that. Yeah, you get a taste from it, I guess, in the long holidays and things, but it's an automatic part of life, isn't it?
So both of them at the end of the episode really highlighted this idea that you're talking about, the need to invest and take steps now. And so at the end of their episode, they said, so we encourage you right now, reach out, take 60 seconds to email or text someone or call someone, even someone you haven't spoken to for several years, someone that's been important in your life, and just reach out. I'm thinking about you and would love to connect. Now, unless something pretty bad has gone on between the two of you, most people are really going to appreciate hearing from you in that way. I recently reconnected with a friend that we have not been in touch in over 20 years. And it was so nice to get to reconnect with her and be reminded of things that we had done and times that we had shared together. So reaching out.
That's funny. I was going to ask you about that, because I know you had that, you had that scheduled to happen, and it didn't happen when you thought it was going to happen. And but like longer, you hadn't spoken to her for 20 years or something.
Yeah. But in certain way, obviously 4,000 things have changed in both of our lives. And yet we're still us, and it was still fun to connect. And she shared a story about, we were in grad school together, and she shared a story that made me laugh so hard that I had no recollection of. And then I said, well, remember when I came to visit you? Because I lived in Ohio at the time, or Michigan at the time, and she lived in California. She said, no, I do not remember you coming to visit. So just getting to process those things. So the call to action for everyone after listening to this today is reach out, do something to improve relationships, reach out to someone, connect. It does not have to be big efforts. These can be small efforts, but it's the idea of making that effort that's going to help your relationships. And the thing I want to close with, because, we're all busy and, oh, Terri, I don't want to have to text someone right now. I'll do it later. We don't prioritize it enough. Oftentimes, I know I don't. And so I'll leave you with this fact. From the research, they really see, and this was research from a different researcher, not even this study, but loneliness or being isolated, the impact that has on our health has been equated to being as detrimental to us as smoking a half a pack of cigarettes a day.
Blimey.
Or being obese. Now, we all know, we've all learned at this stage, half a pack of cigarettes a day, that is detrimental to our health. Obesity, morbid obesity, that is detrimental to our health. Loneliness or being socially isolated is as equally damaging to our health as those two things. So please text someone, reach out, connect, hang out with someone, whatever you need to do. And that's all I've got, Daisy.
Well, and also you mentioned earlier that those connections can be like the little seemingly insignificant things, like the barista who makes your coffee every morning before, on the way to work or whatever it is. But I think making a bit more of those interactions, my mum's really good at this. It always drives me mad when I go and stay with her and we're walking the dogs or something, and she stops to talk to every bloody person who, she doesn't really know any of them, but she knows them in their people she sees regularly or whatever, and and stops to have a chat with them all. But that's the kind of thing that she's learned that has really helped her over the years, and has really helped recently, fairly recently. It's been years now, but it often feels very recent. When my stepfather passed away, and obviously that was a monumental life change for her, and something really hard to just get through the day to day. So those little connections, those seemingly insignificant but actually highly significant, because that was the other thing. She didn't sort of feel like too much connection. She didn't really feel like doing too much of the going out and chatting with friends and all that that was almost too much. Mm-hmm. But those small little interactions, the time taken to have a bit of a conversation with the lady behind the pharmacy counter, or the person who makes the coffee, or one of the people she bumps into dog walking, or whatever it is. Those little bits. So I think it's going back really to what you said at the beginning. It doesn't have to be, your one true love relationship. It doesn't have to be an overly intimate relationship. It's all these different layers of connection that are important and add up. And that, it can be somebody that sometimes that you never even see. You talked about some of the dangers of social media, but of course, as we very much know, the other side of that, the connection that you have. And I think everyone's come to realize that during the COVID era, the importance of that online interaction and how important that can be. But you know what it's like. And I mean, this is how we met in the Two Keto Dudes Facebook group. Mm-hmm. Just people that you're connecting with and commenting with, and you start seeing that you have things in common. You both jump in with comments along the same vein and things like that. And then maybe you start getting to chat to people in PMs and all the rest of it, and then who knows, it can turn into relationships like we've got. So there are all sorts of ways of getting these connections.
That's right.
And I, of course, 100% count dogs as people when it comes to connection. And I mean, I know there have been studies and there are statistics about the benefits you get from interaction with your pets, and the what is it that's produces it? It's oxytocin. Is it when you're stroking your pets and things like that? But I can often feel the benefit of interactions with my dogs, interactions with other people. So it's just worth, I think, being aware of all kind of connections, not just the first ones that come to your mind, the big important ones, but think about little ways that you can just I almost see it sort of like of topping up a battery, with lots of little connections, instead of just shops that you go in regularly or whatever, instead of just doing things automatically, just stop for 20 seconds. How are you doing today? And genuinely interested in what they have to say.
I think that's a positive reframe also, Daisy. Might help you have more patience when your mom wants to stop and talk to the 10th person on the walk. But the idea that this is social fitness. Taking 200 extra steps in a day is topping off your physical fitness. It's not just the big workouts. It's the movement. It's the stretching. It's the other things that you do as well. And so thinking about these, even though they may not be, again, the most significant people in your life, the interaction with them, the time, the social connection, that's social fitness. And that's super important that we take care of that, not just our dietary wellness and our physical fitness, but that social fitness. So hopefully everyone gets out there and does some things that will add to their social fitness today.
Yeah, so I think that's a good way to view it. And like the way you ended with equating it to, or the lack of it, equating it to smoking half a packet of cigarettes or obesity. So you can see the importance of it, and to just put it on your list alongside other things that are a bit more obvious. Like you'd say, physical fitness, or looking at your diet, or, whatever it is, it needs to be on the list.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully, Daisy, we talked about some other angles of this, because I do believe this is a study that you mentioned before. You had an episode about their findings. So hopefully we addressed it a little differently in today's episode.
Yeah, I think we did. It sort of sounded familiar, but not too much overlap. But like we said before, that's why we keep coming back to this topic of connection. It is so important. So I think it's worth coming at from every angle possible.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, take good care out there. And Daisy, I will talk with you soon.
Have a very wonderful week.